So we have the four panelists are Gottfried Ludewig and Beth Rogozinski, Peter Schardt, and Pavlos Tsantilas. So please join me on the stage. Thank you very much. Well, why don't we go around with introductions, and maybe Pavlos, could we start with you?
Yes. So I'm Pavlos Tsantilas. I'm a medical doctor. So I'm here today as a user of digital health products, new technologies. I'm in my 6th year of vascular surgery residency, and in between I was doing a postdoctoral research fellowship at Stanford University in the vascular surgery department until the beginning of this year. So my research focus is on carotid artery stenosis and how to prevent stroke, but I also have a deep interest in digital health. And I'm looking forward to this panel.
Great, good. Okay. Peter?
Yeah, my name is Peter Schardt. I'm the CTO of Siemens Healthineers, and since many of you are from Germany, I hope everybody knows Siemens Healthineers. So for those who don't know, we have our roots back more than 100 years with the invention of the X-rays, right? Which is still, as of today, the workhorse of many diagnostics decisions and also many minimally invasive therapies. But yes, we added software capability to drive digitalization of the radiology, but now machine learning and AI is driving new applications on top, right? And I think if I would talk about our vision of Siemens Healthineers, we apply the digital twin concept, right? Which we are very familiar in our actual physical products, in the R&D departments to simulate and predict the behavior. We are now expanding that also to manufacturing and the operation. Pretty much same as with your jet engine analogy. That was pretty good. But the ultimate goal is to apply that vision to the human being, right? And that is really what precision health is about. It is about knowing, understanding, able to predict and prevent. And even when it comes to the point where we have to cure, right? What are the therapy options? How can we predict potential outcomes in order to precisely pick the right option, right? So that's where this is going. And this is not without data which fuel the models, the validation of the modules, and then applying the models to the actual individual situation. So I'm really looking forward to see that strive with all of your help.
Beth?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Rogozinski. I'm the CEO of Signal to Health, which is a digital health consultancy. I actually, unlike my colleagues, have a background in media technology. I actually used to work in this building. This used to be Silicon Graphics. So it's wonderful to be back here again. So my background is really beyond SGI. I've been involved in a number of big tech companies. I was at Macromedia and helped to develop Final Cut, which we sold to Apple during the .com. I was at a .com that we took public, and then I dove in deep into entrepreneurialism and have since then become a serial entrepreneur. About a decade ago, I shifted my attention to the practice of digital health and initially was working with folks at UCSF and Stanford on some digital interventions for healthcare. In 2013, I met and helped to found a company, met the founders and helped to found the company called Pear Therapeutics, which when I was chief product officer, we brought to market and to the FDA the first FDA-approved software as a medical device. And so today I work with a number of different startups, consultancy groups, and folks like Stanford again, and the National Mental Health Innovation Center.
Thank you.
Okay, Gottfried Ludewig. I'm a Director General at the Federal Ministry of Health back in Germany. This department did not exist 1.5 years ago, so you probably have an idea how important digitalization was in that field for the regulator. So I'm very happy to have this position now for 1.5 years. And what is our role? Just if not everyone is aware here in the room, it's to set the regulatory framework for the statutory health insurance companies back in Germany. They cover 70 million people back in Germany and spend 250 billion euros per year for healthcare. And as you see, and as probably a lot of Germans are in the room, you know that we are a little bit behind of all the digital development in the world. Just talking about e-prescription or medical records, which we still print out, or loving our fax machine, which is probably everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
The doctors love the fax machines. Only the lawyers love more the fax machines. And you know, we try to kill the fax machine and get the email and get the electronic medical record into the system, and I'm really looking forward to that discussion.
Great. Maybe we could start out, Beth and Gottfried, given your perspectives in the United States and Gottfried in Germany. What's the policy landscape like? Beth, if you can address it in the United States, and of course, as you pointed out, you were successful in getting the first approved digital therapeutic as a medical device approved by the FDA. You can describe that process and what's the state of play in the United States today in terms of, particularly for the entrepreneurs here in the audience that may be thinking about having something in the digital health space that they would like to get introduced in the care delivery space in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first thing I'll say is that the agency, the FDA, the US FDA, has actually changed significantly since we initially started Pear Therapeutics. And I think that that's a really very good thing. I think that in 2013 and 2014, the agency really didn't know what to do with mobile medical devices and digital medicine or anything that was coming through in that capacity. So we at Pear took it upon ourselves to try and work within the systems as they existed in healthcare. And so we had really rigorous randomized controlled double-blind studies that we brought to the agency, and the data actually, and the p-value of that data actually spoke for itself. So we were successful in writing a de novo 510K to get this across. Since that time, the agency has launched and initiated a pre-certification program. They've enhanced the Breakthrough Devices program. And originally under Scott Gottlieb and now under Ned Sharpless, they've really embraced kind of an ideology of agile methodology and really have woken up to the fact that they need to accelerate the access of these devices to the people and their approval. I think it's important to note that at Pear we still continue to focus on a regulated pathway because it's a point of differentiation. There are hundreds of thousands. I think now the numbers are like 500,000 healthcare apps if you look at between the Android App Store and iTunes. And so how do clinicians like yourselves make decisions on which ones are going to be efficacious and safe for your patients? So I think the regulated pathway is a valid one. And now with some of these programs, and I know similar programs and actually even enhanced programs are going on, I think it's actually the best way that we can move forward with all of this.
Yeah, well, from a German perspective, actually, we're still working on that. The Digital Care Act, which was passed by the German cabinet in July, is now hopefully being passed by Bundestag, so the German parliament, next week. And we established a very, very similar approach as the FDA did already a couple of years ago. Also following very inspiring talks with Pear Therapeutics, for example, in the beginning of 2019 and with our FDA colleagues. And because we strongly believe that we have here software as a medical device as a new product category which really can help a lot in creating a better outcome of healthcare, especially, well, just thinking of the management of chronic diseases. Just measuring better, just having better sensors, just better knowing when a doctor to interact with this patient. This is not a theory. I mean, just looking at a recent study at the Charité following a chronic disease, heart disease, we see a downcrease of the mortality rate from 11% to 8%. So we see that those kind of software as a medical device really can help us creating a better outcome in healthcare. And this is our obligation, actually, as the Federal Ministry of Health, to open and to give access to such products to the statutory health insurance market. And this is what we now establish, and not only having the market access as the FDA does, and where we were really very inspired by with the pre-cert program, but also connecting that with the reimbursement scheme from the statutory health insurance companies. So if I'm allowed to do a little commercial break, if you think about getting a startup done, I mean, you can create it here, but probably can also get to the German market. We at least would appreciate that very much if you gave better healthcare output then.
That's great. That's great. Next, maybe if we turn Peter and Pavlos, each of you represents complementary and distinctive ends of the healthcare delivery spectrum. Peter, you're an executive at a major technology company with a large presence in health, and Pavlos, you're a practicing physician about to be completed vascular surgeon trainee. How do you look at the field of regulation, both Peter from your perspective as getting your products into the care delivery space, and Pavlos from your perspective as a practitioner, but also as an entrepreneur, seeing issues and problems in the patients you treat and wanting to bring your knowledge and expertise to the development of devices or new treatments. Pavlos, why don't we start with you, and you can give us your perspectives.
So I think this is a very important question. So when I look at digital health from a clinician perspective, I think it can be a solution for many problems in our healthcare business. Physicians at the moment, or also nurses, have a very high workload. Work is very frustrating at some point, very ineffective, and a lot of documentary work. So I think digital health can solve many of those problems, but I think it's very important to have the right framework for that. So at the moment in Germany, or in Bavaria at least, we are not able to use many of innovative products that we use in our private daily routine, like messaging systems like WhatsApp. We cannot use that, although they are very effective. So I think frameworks have to make a baseline and have to be sure that data privacy for patients has to be safe, but they shouldn't be too strict. They should be adaptive. They should be up to date. Yeah.
Good. Peter?
So from a regulator perspective, I would say technology is now far ahead of what you guys have to accomplish, right? So technology, innovation, speeds, moves as fast as we can see it, and we try also as an industry get this technology into products into our hands of our customers, like Pavlov, right? Which might be very simple things in the first place, right? Let's say automating more of the workflow, making the workflow and the outcomes more predictable, right? And helping you guys, right? Which has little to do with the actual clinical work you have to do, right? But the technologies which we apply, like machine learning and training our machines on data, so that is still a fuzzy field in terms of regulation, right? Because what is the actual outcome? How do you really validate that it always responds exactly as expected, and so on? I think we also have to think about new control systems, but think ahead, right? What if the algorithms really learn as they go by the data they collect every day, right? Look at the Google cars which are driving around here of the campus. Yeah, they learn every single mile. They learn and adapt to this, right? And that will be the case for our algorithms, which we today develop and already have on the market as solutions. But that is not in the future that there is a release every year. Maybe in the future there will be a release every day because they became even more smart based on the huge amount of data. So I think the regulative approach really has to be rethought in order to make that happen.
And Gottfried, as a member of the German government, and you have responsibility both to encourage innovation and entrepreneurial development in medical technology, but also you have a regulatory responsibility for the protection of the citizens of the country. How do you balance those two? And in particular, in the arena of digital health, do you see them as being more synergistic or in conflict?
Well, very good question, and I couldn't agree more on the one hand, because we are sure in Germany we have to speed up, because in the last 15 years, everyone probably is aware of that we just haven't done anything. We just have kept the regulatory framework like in 2000 or 2005. So for us to find a balance is not that difficult, because it's, you know, we are still starting the opening of the regulatory framework, which is to us a very important field. However, I couldn't agree more with you as well. Looking about all the things going on in AI, looking about the question of analyzing imaging, and the question on how are algorithms validated, how are they, what is the benchmark we are looking at for algorithms? How do they explain their decision? Is there any kind of, kind of bias within that? I mean, we had a lot of talks in here. This is challenging the regulator because, to be very honest and very frank, the regulator does not have enough talent within their structures to really give, I think, an absolute, very good and balanced answer to that. And what we are working on is, first of all, also recruiting talent to the regulator to understand the technology before we regulate the technology. Because in our days today, I have the impression that often we regulate the technology without understanding the technology. And this is something we really have to shift in mind, that you can't just say, oh, we prohibit this kind of technology because we don't understand it. Instead of we try to understand it, and then we try to regulate it. And the second thing is that is why we have in a very close exchange also with our colleagues from the FDA. I think this is more and more getting a very international question, which has to be also answered internationally. We face a very broad and international industry, and then we look to the regulator, who is very, very nationally organized and oriented. And that is something, if we want to keep the speed the industry, and to be honest, not only the industry, moreover, startups and other creative minds have, then we have to work together. And we are doing that, for example, with the ITU and the WHO, which now have a specialist group working on the benchmarking of AI. But I think the answer can only be to work together, and that is also why we are in very, very close contact with our colleagues from the FDA.
Great.
Just to add to that, you know, so the U.S. FDA has recently started rounding up folks like Peter and myself to join expert roundtables on AI, on digital medicine, because internally they just can't recruit that rapidly, right? And so they're looking to the industry, and I think that people who are forward-thinking in the industry want to work within those frameworks, right? I think we all probably remember that Google's first foray into health was an unmitigated disaster, right? They just fell right on their faces. They thought, we don't need to, you know, we're just going to move fast and break things, which doesn't work in healthcare. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, there's a lot of the rigor of traditional healthcare models that are really very good product hygiene, right? We just want to make sure that these products are good and safe for people. So by us volunteering and working with the agency, and the agencies, you know, calling on the industry to give a voice to that level of expertise, I think we can actually have a really very synergistic relationships that can lead to success for companies, both small and large, as well as improve outcomes and give clinicians the tools that they need.
And maybe if I add one more perspective to this, which is the global one, right? What can we learn about different initiatives going on in different parts of the world, right? So, for example, looking at China, we see, and that is my observation, things get done if they provide some benefit, right? Well, compromising, for example, data privacy and so on, it comes at a price, right? Then I see what is going on here in the United States, yeah, which is definitely more regulated, but also here it's more the opportunity view rather than the risk view. And when it comes to Germany, right, hey, we have grown up in a risk-averse culture, right, and that's how we look at things. So I'm not saying the China way is the right one, right, but let's see what works best in in what kind of economy, what can we learn from that? And I also encourage everybody to look more on the opportunity side, how to improve things rather than on the risk side, right? It needs to be balanced, and is exactly what you said, right? But in particular, me coming from also having the German view in mind, right? Let's focus more on the opportunities.
Right. Certainly one of the biggest areas of concern anytime we talk about digital health and data coming in digitally, one of the biggest concern is related to data security and privacy. And maybe both for our German colleagues and Beth and Pavlos, you've spent some time in America. Maybe could you contrast attitudes in the two countries as it pertains to privacy? I think security is something that would be a shared imperative on both sides, but privacy and the issue of who owns data may be manifested a little bit differently between the two countries, and maybe we could have some discussion of that. Beth, if you'd like to start, and then just anyone else who'd like to contribute.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting with privacy in the United States because while a person is healthy and well, it's a paramount concern. And the moment they've become ill, it's a red herring. It goes out the window. They're looking for any help that they can get. And we see this in social groups like Patients Like Me or Sober Grid or even Facebook, where people are sharing intimate health details with all their friends and colleagues and looking for that level of help. So I think that, you know, in the US, people are much more willing to exchange their data for goods and services. And I think around the healthcare realm, we're seeing that people are much more interested in exchanging that data to improve others' lives, right? You know, there's a big movement of getting enrolled and invested in digital clinical trials just to kind of advance science. Now, you know, there is obviously still the concern, you know, generally and across the board for security and security breaches. And then, of course, there are special concerns and special laws protecting mental health patients and addiction patients, you know, because of these diseases, overarching kind of stigma. But I think in general, people here are much more willing to be flexible with the amount of data that they share.
Godfrey, why don't you go ahead and begin, then
okay, yeah, whatever. So I couldn't agree more. I mean, data security you already mentioned. Data privacy is already a very special topic in Germany. But to be honest, it's close. Well, it's very similar as you mentioned. From the point if someone is getting ill, the question of sharing my data, the numbers we see are very beyond all you can imagine, probably. It's more something like 95% of people willing to share their data. So this is probably a global effect that people who are ill and see that they probably could have a outcome of sharing their data are also willing to share their data. I think the question or the difference, as from my perspective, is that in the US you have the possibility looking to companies that they already earn money just in the moment they own the data. So they collect data from different hospitals, giving them services, for example, and collecting the data, and their business model is to then sell the data. It's not to create a better process. It's not to invent a new drug. It's just to have collected the data and then to sell the data. And I think there's a very fundamental distinction to be made to Europe. Or to Germany at least. This is not a model we would have in mind. I would have a model more in mind, or we still working on a model to also collect data, obviously with the consent of the patient, and then to open this data on an anonymous way to everyone who is capable to have any kind of step further in the sense of bringing innovation to the system. And from this innovation, from my point of view, then also a profit should be generated, and not from the idea of owning data which you have only collected before.
And I couldn't agree more, Gottfried, on that one, right? There is...
That took quite some time.
Yeah. There is a discussion going on, right? The data is the oil of the future, right? And I find that analogy very dangerous, right? Because oil was much about economy and making money, right? I also believe that ultimately the individual should be in full control of the data, but let's say the totality of the data, that should be an asset which belongs to society in order to drive research, right? And also help companies like ours. Hey, we do not want to own the data, but we want to be able to use the data for a particular purpose, which is develop new applications and advance actually health because of that in order to validate that. So I found it very strange that today there is already a price tag to a medical record, right? And that's what encourages hackers to go into the systems, right? I understand it's a $250 tag in the US for a patient record, it's very dangerous, right? I think we all have to make sure that we guide the discussion in the right direction here and counterfeit these attempts, to build a market which is based on patient data.
Yeah, I also absolutely agree. I don't think the problem is the data security itself. I mean, we have very strong encryption mechanisms that are impossible to, even by quantum computer, to be hacked. So I don't think that having a good data protection system is the problem. But the problem is right now we have to use it. We're not using it. Like we have to convince healthcare workers and also the patients that if we use our new technologies with encrypted mechanisms, that they will benefit from it. And if we convince them, if we gain their trust, this will be a good way for them to get better healthcare. There's another, like, it's not 100% right, but I think we have to be careful not to make data protecting the patient from perfect treatment. So we have to use it, we have to convince our colleagues, and we have to convince the patients that it's safe to use it, and then we will hopefully get better health care.
One of the things that came up in the discussion at various points thus far is thoughts around the topic of who owns the data. And I think the general suggestion has been that individuals own their data. There may be some provisos about that in terms of responsibility of systems to ensure the accuracy of the data, but that individuals own the data. So, and yet today, unlike ordering goods and services, unlike performing financial transactions, where our lives have been radically transformed in the past decade in the way we interact with the world in our finances, interact with the world in how we order goods and services. Today, healthcare has been relatively little changed by the technological revolution so far. And you mentioned before, and yes, we still have fax machines as well. And,
good to hear.
And I don't know, maybe it's a shared misery, but why is it that we haven't had the type of consumer outcry for access to health data? I mean, imagine today if in the banking industry, a bank were to say, well, here's your ATM card, but you can only use it at my bank's ATM. You can't use it at any other bank's. I mean, would anyone use that bank, you know? I mean, now the entire financial services network, for better or for worse, I sometimes wonder what would happen if that system was hacked. But the entire financial services network is connected in that way. And yet we don't have anything remotely resembling that in healthcare. And we haven't seen the type of public outcry that, you know, this is my data, I want it, give it to me in a form that I can understand it. Thoughts about why that isn't the case?
Maybe one thought. I think the analogy breaks when you, for example, compare the financial system and in my bank account, my data, right, and compare that to my medical record, right? Because at the end of the day, I can buy an insurance, right, for whatever financial damage I might occur, right, and I can recover from that very quickly, right? Maybe because I have a good insurance policy, right? Because at the end of the day, this is, well, just money, but it is a non-tangible asset, right? And also the life cycle of my financial transactions, well, it might go a couple of years back, right? But when it comes to my medical record, this is my whole life, yeah? And I don't want to mess around with it, right? I cannot insure myself for somebody, let's say, making a wrong decision or whatever, right? If I get sick, I get sick, right? And I think there is a fundamental difference here. And maybe that is why there is also reluctance in terms of opening it as fast and as quick as it is being in the consumer industry or also in the financial industry.
I think there's also a level of medical illiteracy that patients don't really understand the value of their data. And so they're not making demands for it. And it's only in those moments of crises where, you know, it's still in a world of sick care and not health care that they become aware of the fact that this is something that is, you know, valuable both to them and to others. And so I think where you really see people starting to make this call for the data are people that have done the genetic screens and they have a predisposition to certain diseases where they, you know, there's an inciting moment where they become then advocates and self-advocates. So I think in general, though, you know, people don't advocate for their own health and their own data until there's a crisis. And so unlike, you know what your financial situation is on a day-to-day basis, you know, you're not waiting until you've run out of money to make that demand from the bank, but in healthcare, people will typically, three quarters of people are not proactive in their health and their health maintenance.
I just want I think it was great that you brought this this topic with financial issues, and also regarding that we have a Transatlantic Sync conference regarding differences between Germany and the US. So I came here and I knew I will not need to get dollars from the ATM machine because I can pay everything with a credit card. In Germany, in 2017, 75% of the people paid cash. So even with technologies that we think that are safe, banking is safe, I'm convinced banking is safe, people in Germany, I'm not sure if they don't trust those technologies, if they want to be more anonymous, or if it's just a lack of explaining to them that it's better to use the credit card because you don't have to go to the ATM first, you can pay directly in the shop. So that's probably a difference between Germany and the US. Yeah.
And I may add one thought. It's a very highly regulated market. And it's a market where a lot of people and a lot of companies, also including doctors, are not earning that badly their income or not gaining a bad income. And it's not that, you know, you really feel the enthusiasm if you talk to them, that they want to drive forward as fast as possible in a disruptive way as possible to make change happen. And I mean, you're right, there's not the cry out from the consumer side, but before the iPhone was invented and was brought to market, and there was no one crying out for a telephone without, you know, I don't know what that is in English, but, you know, just having a surface where you have the control of the telephone. There was no one. It was just Steve Jobs and Apple strongly believing in that product and offering it to the market, which was not regulated as the healthcare market is. Right. So I see, and that's another point, you know, it's the consumers, but it's also the offer you get as a consumer. And that's why I think looking to all the big tech companies and also looking to China and looking to whoever in this world is moving forward to get into this market, this will really bring a lot of disruptive potential or innovative potential to the market of healthcare, to the consumer, and then probably you finally have also the cry out of the consumer as he finally knows what everything good you can do with digitalization.
You know, I just want to add one thing on what Pavlos was saying too, because I think that the point that you were making, the difference of, you know, here in the US, the people who still pay cash and the people who are less technologically savvy are older populations, right? Millennials are paying with everything with their phone and with the card, right? And as you go up in age, you know, and these are the people that are the highest utilizers of the healthcare system, right? You know, middle-aged and older people are still not that, you know, they're not digital natives yet. And so I think that that is possibly another reason why, you know, we're not seeing these outcries. So that when the people are hitting that crisis moment, that critical moment where they should and would be calling for the access to that data, you know, these are not our digital natives.
It's come up several times thus far in the panel about innovation disruption in this space, and you know, how much of this is likely to occur through large established companies like Siemens, and how much is likely to occur, Beth, from your world, which has been with startups, and maybe it isn't either or, rarely is. What would be more logically pursued by a large established company, and what would be perhaps better pursued by a company formed by people who have a spark of an idea with a lot of enthusiasm and a little bit of funding, but an entirely open runway as to how they could pursue that idea?
Do you want to start?
Well, may I start, right? Well, I think because the human being is so complex, yeah, the opportunities for, let's say, new innovations to understand diseases better, to diagnose diseases better and treat them better, they are immense, right? And I don't think that we alone can cover pretty much that whole complexity and variability. I think we depend on academia, on research teams, but also then on startups to really, let's say, demonstrate that things work, right? I think what our role will be more to provide scale, right? I think, for example, we have an install base of 600,000 instruments globally, right? And yeah, our instruments, they touch 240,000 patients every single hour, right? So even if we see applications which really work and which provably provide benefits, then we could be the one helping to scale that on a global basis and bring it to, let's say, the larger population.
I agree completely, and I think that, you know, healthcare is a team sport, and I think that, you know, and I mentioned, you know, our interest in working with the FDA and the agency and with all of the other players. It's a huge ecosystem. When I've developed digital therapeutics, this is a BYOD, bring your own device kind of world and distribution. And so we need to work with the Apples of the world and the Siemens of the world. I think that there are things that, you know, in this ecosystem that are mimetic to the different players, right? So I think that, you know, startups are really very good at being agile, moving fast, disrupting, and I think that the large established companies are really very good at commercialization, distribution, scaling. I think that there's got to be a lot of synergies that we pull together. I mean, we were having a discussion in the prep room about the innovator's dilemma, right? You know, when low-cost things are coming in the market, how do you prepare when you're a large company? You know, I mentioned that I worked here at Silicon Graphics, and we were a victim of the innovator's dilemma. We just didn't move fast enough. And so I imagine that companies like Peters, like Apple, are really, you know, scanning the horizon and looking to work with startups so that they don't fall foul.
Right. Our two countries differ widely in terms of how the cost of healthcare services are paid for. And maybe we could have a discussion about how that impacts innovation, and are there certain areas of digital health that are likely to be developed in a more facile way in the United States because of our payment models, and conversely, others developed in a more facile way in Germany because of the payment model there. Would you like to get us started?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of differences, and the biggest advantage for the US is obviously that they have a huge also out-of-the-pocket market, in the sense the consumer is willing also to pay for a service, also a digital device, whereas this is in Germany does not happen, not at all, but in a very rare percentage. And this is a huge advantage for also young entrepreneurs, for startups, because obviously they need some money getting into their product and getting into their company to develop more and more innovation. That's a huge difference. Also, our key motivation for what I told you before, for the new market access and reimbursement scheme for the software as a digital device, because if we don't connect that with the reimbursement scheme, it won't work in Germany at all. First difference. Second difference, I think, is the role of insurance companies, because statutory health insurance companies are very highly regulated and are not allowed to invest that much money in new procedures or new digital devices, something which we are also going to change in the Digital Care Act, because we strongly believe that also those insurance companies should not be only a payer, but should be a player also in the system, in the sense of driving innovation forward.
Good.
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting, the strength of having the out-of-pocket payers and the fee-for-service model helps us to move innovation, but it doesn't allow us to scale. And I think that we already have a massive number of people in the United States that are under a field of capitation, right? Everybody in Medicare never graduates out of Medicare. They may have supplemental and they may actually pay some out of pocket, but this is a capitation audience. Medicaid, the same. And I think that when we have these, the capitation audience and patient set, there's a greater opportunity for us to bring in more preventive, more earlier on that pipeline that you showed in your slides, right? So we don't have to wait until we get to a cure. We can do the prevention, we can do the monitoring and the surveillance. And I think fields of capitation really allow for that, whereas fee-for-service is more, I get paid if I'm a clinician, when I see a patient, and they only come to me when they're sick because they don't want to pay for that. So I think that, there's benefits to both. I'm particularly interested in some of these new outcomes-based contracting models, bundled fee services, and there's groups like Health Tech for Medicaid that are really looking at how we can deliver services to this wide audience of capitation in the US.
Yeah, that is actually a good point, right? Because I think what is common to both systems in Germany and the US is that the reimbursement is really looking at the cost, right? What is the cost of the equipment? What is the cost of the medication? What is the cost of labor, right? And try to reimburse that. I also lived 6 years in the US, right? And my wife had to go 2 days to the hospital, and then I got a bill about $20,000, which said, this is not a bill, actually, right? However, it was all saying, here's what we did, right? And here are the costs, exactly the same. We have to turn the incentive scheme more to outcome-based, because at the end of the day, and I think that is a good thing, the patient will become the more educated decision maker at the end, and I will be willing to pay on outcomes, right? If I'm in charge, I will, maybe if I get cancer, hey, I don't care. I take my money and bring it to whom better can give me, let's say, the best prediction for the best outcome. Yeah? So I think you're right. Yeah? We have to change that mindset in a way. It will be difficult. It will be a very difficult transition, because we have to make sure that the efforts are getting paid for. That is for sure, right? In a totality, but in the individual case, it should be really focused on the outcomes.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to open it up for your questions here in just a moment, but maybe we could have a last question here for the panel before we get questions and feedback from the audience. And maybe that question would be asking you to look forward in the future, 5 to 10 years from now. If everything goes as you would have it go, how will health and the delivery of health care be different, say 10 years from now, than it is today because of digital health, both consumer-facing devices, AI, machine learning-enabled analytics? What will the landscape look like then?
Maybe if I start, right,
Sure.
in 10 years, I will have an app on my iPhone, which is my digital twin, which represents my current state of health, which will be updated by whatever medical exam I will have, but also with data from my wearables, which will also track my level of exercise and pretty much everything. And it will educate me on how to best prevent that I'm getting sick. And the same digital twin will also be available to my physician to look at that data and also get me in contact with my physician in order to understand and have a sparring partner. How can I interpret what that tells me, right? So I think that is a very important vehicle also to build that relationship, because at the end of the day, I don't believe that the future is all purely digital and AI, right? It is a means of getting, let's say, humans into contact and interpret what this data tells us. Yeah.
Great. Pavlos?
Yeah, I also hope I will use an app to connect with my patients in 10 years. I hope we will overcome the regulatory aspects. I hope we will use the technologies of AI, machine learning, in terms of like an optimizing tool or like as an intelligent assisting system to just facilitate our daily work and to increase safety for the patients. I cannot imagine that, so the fear, as we heard in the other panel, is always that the machines will replace our work. The work we do as a doctor or as a nurse is like highly human interactive. So I don't think we will be replaced by machines. I think they will very much help us. They will assist us. And just a small example, maybe how I'm convinced that this will work. We have a big potential in telemedicine where we talk to a patient who is not here. So this morning I talked to my 8-month-old son and through FaceTime. And he recognized me, he was smiling, although he's like 6,000 miles away. So I'm very convinced that those technologies will help us, will assist us, but will not replace us.
Great, thank you. Beth?
I agree completely that, nothing that I've ever worked on in the digital health space has been with the intention to disintermediate the clinicians.
Yeah.
There's a shortage of clinicians around the globe. I think that, adding to Peter's vision for what this world it will look like in 5 or 10 years, I think that there's a grand opportunity with digital medicine to address the social determinants of health and the behavioral determinants of health, and in particular around CNS, right? So I think that there's a lot of health issues that are driven by insomnia, depression, anxiety, and the ways that human beings begin to cope with that. So I think that via these sensors that we'll be able to have much more objective measurements and metrics around what's been considered like the softer science, of mental health and behavioral health. So I think adding that to this vision was where I really hope that this may go.
Great.
Couldn't agree more. I think we will move from the one-size-fits-all approach to the really personalized healthcare, as you mentioned before, really healthcare, not sick care, which is a fundamentally new approach. It will be really personalized healthcare that leads us to an outcome-based reimbursement model. And the easy answer is because everything else we can't afford. Because
Right.
those systems are not capable to afford personalized healthcare. If you look to the pharmaceutical companies and the first lovely ideas of personalized medicine and what that costs us. So this will lead to outcome-based reimbursement. The doctors will still be there, and hopefully the fax machine will be gone.
Great, great. Well, that's a very optimistic and heartwarming, I think, vision for the future. So I personally hope that everything that's been said actually is the way that it plays out. I think it can be, and I think it should be. I also very much agree. I don't think that what I would like to think of high tech as enabling high touch, and that is enabling us as physicians to get back to the personal connectedness with our patients in ways that have been challenged, frankly, in the past decade, because the technology, particularly the information technology that we've introduced in the healthcare delivery space, and I'm speaking most specifically in the United States, the environment I know the best, that technology has oftentimes served as a barrier between or a layer between us and our patients. I mean, there's nothing more disheartening, I think, than both for the physician and for the patient than during a visit between a patient and the physician to have the physician at a computer terminal typing the entire time, not even looking in the eye of the patient. I mean, that's not good communication. It doesn't bring reward and fulfillment to physicians, nor does it really meet the needs of our patients. The more we can get back to that sort of personal connectedness, but personal connectedness informed by tremendous knowledge that is never going to sit within the brain of even the very best clinician, but can be enabled and empowered by what has changed so many other sectors of the economy and of our lives, but has had relatively little effect on health and healthcare thus far. But we know the future is going to be different. So let's open it up now for your questions and your feedback for any of us on the panel. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the great discussion. My name is Hauke Schmidt. I'm with Bosch. I live in the Bay Area for 20 years here now, originally from Germany. And looking at sort of the healthcare situation, I'm actually quite happy with the access to the outcomes I have digitally online and in apps and so on. What I'm not very happy with, and I'd be interested in your view, is on the cost side of things, right? It appears to be extremely difficult to predict even routine or planned interactions with the healthcare system in terms of figuring out what the cost would be upfront. So I'm not even talking about emergencies, just the planned parts. And so in terms of the medical literacy, how do we enable consumers then to be a more active part in that as well, in terms of sort of not shying away from the healthcare system because it's also unpredictable? Insurances seem to be hell-bent on obscuring this. What's your view on that?
I'll start. I actually have very strong opinions that the pricing system in healthcare is one of the reasons that it's broken, right? People will avoid going until the very end because of that unknown. Now in Congress, they've been trying to kind of move these price transparency systems through. I agree with you completely that the insurance companies actually help to really obfuscate and obscure what these things really cost. And so it actually de-incentivizes prevention and other early interventions that can actually, at the end of the day, decrease costs. I think really what we need to do is we need to, force the price transparency. Pavlos, used the word trust earlier, right? When talking about our health data, but transparency and letting people know what their options are enhances and improves that trust.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, is this on? Hi, thank you very much for a very interesting panel. I was born and raised in Germany, but I've been in the United States for a number of years now. My aging family members are back in Germany, have to go to the doctor and to the hospital in Germany. I just wanted to ask you if you could briefly comment on the latest status of the electronic medical record in Germany, because I think for somebody like me who's trying to help with all the issues that come up with advanced age, that would make things a lot easier. Thank you.
That's an easy answer. So the legislative initiative was passed by Bundestag beginning of this year and forces the statutory health insurance companies to have a medical record for every single German insured person by the 1st January of 2021. So still some time to go, but at least finally we are moving forward.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Again, a German who lives here since 20 years. You mentioned the benefits of wearable devices, right? So I have my Garmin here, right? It selects my heart rate when I'm running. I opted out to sharing that with Strava. And the reason is, basically, think about my insurance company, seeing my data. And then at some point, I have to change insurance company, and they said, you have a medical condition, we won't give you insurance anymore. So this is just my view on that.
I think that came up in the discussion about being one of the differences between the admittedly poor analogy between financial data and financial transactions and healthcare data. But Beth, do you want to comment more on that?
Just really quickly, the Accountable Care Act that was passed under the Obama administration actually removed the pre-existing condition clauses that were allowing insurance companies to boot people out, right? And so, I think that is something, there's still a level of stigma and concern about that, but I think that this is an area where, we need to, stand firm that, people shouldn't be punished for their needs for health, right? This is not food where everybody needs about the same amount of calories every day. These people have varying needs, and I think as a society and a cohesive society, we need to balance that out and take care of everybody in that capacity.
I would just like to add, I think this is one of the huge advantages, finally, of the German system, because it's not a risk-adjusted rate you pay. And this is, I think, one of the hugest risks of digitalization, as you mentioned before, to be misused exactly for what you pointed out. And I think this is why, the good old Bismarck 150 years ago thought about the statutory health insurance system. I think also in the digitalized world, this is a huge advantage to have this kind of approach.
Mm-hmm. And if I may add, I think the question is very valid, and I think there is an ethical debate ahead of us, right? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, we want to incentivize people staying healthy, having a good diet, doing exercise to really prevent. But how can we incentivize that while not punishing those who, let's say, are not doing this, right? So if you compare this with the car insurance, right, it's my choice, what I do or what I don't do in order to drive my policy, my premiums up and down, right? I can even elect not to get into a car. But if I'm getting sick, right, I might be responsible for that, but I might not, because it's my genome or whatever, right? So I think this is a very, let's say, difficult discussion. I don't think there is a clear answer to that yet. Mm-hmm. And I think it needs the debate, actually, an open debate. Mm.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for this wonderful discussion on the panel. I really enjoyed it. I would like to poke a bit more into data accessibility and startups and companies in Germany having access to research quality data to drive innovation. We heard that the US model is companies get access to data and own the data, and I realize this is far from optimal. So I'd like to know what are strategies that could be applied in Germany to sort of develop a different model and enable German companies to be competitive on an international scale. Maybe Beth, as a consultant, could give some advice to this, and of course the others. Thanks.
I could also use it for a little commercial break again for my Digital Care Act. Because we established a research data center collecting all, at least billing data from our health, statutory health insurance companies, and make them accessible for research in the next upcoming 2 years. And that's the first step. It's only the billing data. It's not the clinical data. But the idea of this behind, obviously, is that on a consent basis, that then the German patient also can donate their data, their clinical data, finally from their medical record to this data research center, so that we have a clear state-regulated structure where all this data will be collected and where then it could be used for research, and again, the reimbursement could be generated out of better processes or better medicants or something else. Yeah. So we're working on it, finally. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your discussion. My name is Georgios Marinos. I am a doctoral candidate in Germany. Currently, in the medical literature, we can find association studies. For example, a gene is associated with a specific type of cancer. In my opinion, we need to change from correlation to causation. Do you think that digital health will help us?
So, I think that it's an interesting thing because a lot of health issues are complex and multifactorial, right? And so as scientists, and the scientists in the room understand, that we're trying to kind of isolate and begin to isolate. And so I think that as we move towards personalized healthcare, we'll be able to see more causation, but a lot of things are bidirectional, and and the correlations are where we're going to have to plant flags at a certain point. So I think at the end of the day, though, more data is going to be better for sorting out the true facts of all of this, and more objective data, right? I had mentioned mental health and CNS issues, and we're only now beginning to have objective metrics on those types of things, and I think that will eventually, and with the algorithms, and AI, it will really begin to help us sort it out.
I'd also like to add to that. So also in combination with the previous question, so we have the possibility to also to perform secondary data analysis where, so for example, in my field, choroidal stenosis, every physician after surgery has to file out a form, and this form goes to a quality assurance institute, and then you can talk with those people or apply. You have, it's very formal. And then you get access to secondary data analysis. You send them your R script, and they will send you back the information. But as you said, the problem is all the data we get from those results, we don't know if it's a causal effect. We only know that there might be an association. So coming back to your question, I made my thoughts on that, and I think also in the times now where everything goes fast. We see randomized controlled trials still as the high standards, but they take a lot of time. And I think if we have a tool that monitors all the parameters, all the features of a patient or of a human being, if we might get to that point where we have all the information and work on the differences in a prospective manner, we might get to the point where we can say this is a causal effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Thank you. Cornelia Walter, I've been for the past 20 years with UNICEF, and I'm currently writing a book on social change. It's great to see that software can serve to understand, to maintain, and to fix the human hardware, the body. And I was wondering to which extent is already taken into consideration in this transition to a new era of medicine that human existence includes also the software component, the aspirations and the emotions. If you could touch on that. Thank you.
I think that's actually a really critical component. Sorry, did you want to? And that I mentioned earlier that a lot of my work focuses on CNS, on mental health and behavioral health, and I think that when you're looking at shifting the healthcare paradigm, you've got to really look holistically at the whole being, and that not only includes. And coming from technology, we call the body the wetware. So there's hardware, software, and wetware. But so it not only includes the wetware, but the entire environment, right? And Lloyd talked about the social determinants aspect. So I think that those types of motivations and inspirations are de rigueur for the next level of health.
Hi, my name is Richard Gruner. I'm working for autonomous driving here in the Bay Area. So I come from Germany, and I live here in the Bay Area, but occasionally I also travel to Germany. Therefore, sometimes I also still use the German healthcare system a bit. And I'd be very interested to learn what is like the state of the art or what's coming up in terms of a digital record of my health and maybe my doctor's visits that I could actually port from the US to Germany, and so I just can't see it only myself, but also I could share it with a German doctor and then bring it back to the US for upcoming healthcare or yeah.
Very good question. Actually, so the first idea is, if you have a medical record then back in the German system from your statutory health insurance company, obviously you can access that from everywhere in the world and use the data being collected there. If this is interoperable with the medical record here in the US, you know, we all hope that this could work, but as I know, it's already in the US, it's a problem from time to time.
Yes.
Someone told me, I'm not sure if that's right. But we are working on that to work together. But the first step, to be honest, I mean, we are really speeding up in that in Germany. The first step is that we establish a medical record. I mean, it's just crazy still today that we have everything printed out, and if you want to have your data, you know, you get like this from your statutory health insurance companies, a staple of paper. And I think it's time also for Germany to come to the digital age finally.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for this discussion. It's quite interesting. I'm James Bridgman, and perhaps the only lawyer here. But I got to come back to the idea of the industry and the FDA working together. We've seen the trend in the United States that there have been massive cutbacks in money for the regulators. We've seen it in aviation, we've seen it in the drug industry, and now I'm starting to hear it maybe in this situation as well. My comment is this sort of leaves it in the hands of the lawyers. We have this wonderful system in the United States called a lawsuit. We get large sums of money because the regulator didn't do their job, or the industry is basically in bed with the regulator, the self-regulation idea. My question is for our German colleagues, basically, because in Germany, you don't really have that type of check on things. You do have some lawsuits, but you don't get the massive results. How do you see that playing into things?
Well, we try not to go to bed with the industry, first. The second is, on the other hand, I think a better consultation process with the industry and the digital tech companies is useful because we're getting to a new era of regulation, and the thought that this can only be done by the regulator on its own without an exchange, not being influenced, just an exchange of opinions, and not one exchange with one company, but I imagine having the 10 leading companies in the room to talk about real-world evidence or other topics, is something I think we should also, to this thought, we should get used to also in Germany, because otherwise we lose track, we lose speed, and we won't sit at the table where the regulation for this new technology will be decided, which then will be in the US and in China. And our goal, as you may understand, is that we also have a seat at that table where about the regulation will be decided in the end. But we won't go to that, I promise.
If I may add, so we actually appreciate the regulations as long as they are very clear and give us very clear guidelines, right? Actually, it is helpful for us because it keeps those out of the market who might mess around and try to do certain tricks with it, right? So the more solid the system, the better, at least for us as a large company. What I would also like to mention is, this has to evolve, right? And the discussion is also very important. There is no rigid let's say, at one point in time, we have achieved our goal to really regulate everything. The technology is advancing, whether we keep pace with it or not, right? And that's why that discussion is highly beneficial in order to maintain that pace,
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. As promising as this development might be, I am still worried about potential security issues. Even if it is possible to completely encrypt data such that you do not get information directly, there might already be such an option like, if you want to use this app, instead of please provide your email address, please provide your health data. Is there any way or any ideas how regulators can actually help stopping such abuse?
I mean, this is always a it's a very good question, and it's very difficult to give an answer to that. Because if we follow the concept that you are the owner of your data, if you just keep that in mind, then obviously it's also kind of your right to do something with your data. Mm-hmm. And this makes it very, very difficult, just from a logical point of view, to then have certain boundaries again. What are you allowed to do with that? So, as I mentioned before, there are certain things we discussed about the question of where are you allowed to donate your data to. So this is a boundary where I think it's rightful that also a regulator in a solidarity financed system is acting. But I mean, if you want to, if you want to send your data to I don't know whom, should I forbid that? And just one little thing, I have, from time to time, I have the impression that we talk about data security only in the digital world. I think actually security of data is also a very important issue also in the days before a medical record. And if you look in the doctor's office and in some hospitals, probably also there's something to do about also without thinking of a medical record at the moment.
Yeah, I just want to add to this. So don't do it. But I mean, you could basically walk into in our hospital, go into in the ward, and you will be. There's no security at the main entrance. There's no. The nurses are in the patient's room. You can easily go to the checkpoint and go through the files. So and although this is don't do it. But I'm just saying. So I completely understand your concerns, but the data security we have right now, we think it's safe, but I think it has also the potential for improvement. Yeah.
And to be honest, there will always be the criminal intent as long as there's an incentive to steal the data. And to also be honest, there is no 100% guarantee that your data will always be safe. But it's also the obligation of companies like us to invest into new technologies to make the data as safe as possible and to reduce the risk of vulnerabilities as much as possible. And that's what we do, but we also can do that not alone. We have to work with healthcare providers and our customers in an ecosystem where we jointly are trying to get the level as high as possible.
I think technologically, from a technical perspective, the greatest promise is the distributed ledger systems like the blockchain. And as those blockchain systems improve, and I'm sure Peter can talk a little bit more about what you guys are doing in that field, I think that we'll, via a trustless society, we'll have a trusted society.
Right. Well, I believe we're out of time, but Gottfried, Beth, Peter, and Pavlos, I want to thank you very much for your contributions to the panel. And thank you to our wonderful audience for your questions and for being here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What a fully loaded panel, and there's absolutely no other way to sum this up, really. But maybe just a few observations, if I may, 1 minute. I found there to be some very profound insights, right? You introduced the inverse pyramid to us, and you said we're putting all the money at the bottom when really most of our attention shouldn't be migrating to the top. And really, what it seems to me like is there's really no treatment without tracking, and there is no tracking without trust. And unless that chain of custody of data and of diagnosis is intact and has integrity and safety, we can't go up into that base of the pyramid, right? So we can't inverse our attention, our spending, because consumers, patients will not play along, right? That seemed to be a fundamental insight on this. And then, your comment of healthcare being a team sport, I think it was you. I found that insightful because we are also saying that sharing of data should be okay, trading of data is not okay. But how do you do that in a society in which there are for-profit healthcare value chains where the different providers have to trade with each other and pay for data? And I think that's a real hot-button issue that maybe the Transatlantic Partnership can rally around, right? And I guess the other comment that I really loved was more high tech should lead to more high touch. right? At the end of the day, we should all, I think everybody can agree, Americans, Germans, it doesn't matter, anybody around the world agrees, we want more high touch. And not that it's statistically valid, but I can still remember my primary care physician retiring a few years ago, an older doctor with a fundamental wealth of knowledge. And I regretted it because he was retiring a little early, and he said, I just simply cannot take the computers in my life anymore. Because he was literally sitting there as he was talking to me, looking at the screen more than he was looking at me. Right? That was a really bad implementation of digital in the patient interaction. So we have to take that fundamentally seriously. One teaser. It was fantastic to see the audience also reacting to this. We were getting very concrete here. Where are the areas of cooperation for us? Maybe just one or two comments. Is it in data security? Is it in data pooling? Is it in dealing with private versus public data? Things like interoperability you mentioned as well. Like, what should we take away? What should we work on?
Validation, benchmarking, artificial intelligence, algorithms.
Wow, okay.
All right.
Okay, maybe one more time, some mitschreiben.
Yeah.
Yeah?
No, I was just, but I think one of the most challenging topics is the question of how do we validate, how do we analyze, and how do we benchmark algorithms and functions of artificial intelligence in the healthcare sector, and that is something we can only solve together and give an answer to that. So this, I think, is a lovely piece of work to be done.
Fantastic. All right. And are you already working with your colleagues on the American side on this, or is this something that's to be done?
No, it's already, so the ITU, it's the International Telecommunications something unit, together with the WHO, have established a working group on that.
Yeah.
Also with the, obviously, always with the Americans, and under German, leading the group, a German professor from Berlin, and we're working on that quite closely.
And I assume there's private sector groups that are advising on how that would work in practice.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Any other ideas on that front? That's a great one already. I think we need experiments.
Yeah.
I will tell you, when we wrote this book we introduced, we interviewed a lot of ventures in AI and healthcare. And there is such a wealth and richness of experiments happening on both sides of the Atlantic. We need to, I think, rally around a couple of those, make them use cases, try to scale them out and see where the problems are, but also where the promise is, right? So maybe something like a transatlantic incubator of these types of ventures that has safeguards around it so people can feel the trust.